Sophie's hands trembled as she smoothed the wrinkled referral letter on her lap. The waiting room of Westbrook Oncology smelled of antiseptic and dying hopes. 3 months of ignoring the pain, of working double shifts at the diner, of convincing herself it was nothing, all to end up here, in a place she couldn't afford. "They'll bill you," her community clinic doctor had said, eyes filled with pity. "Just go." So here she was, 26 years old with $7 in her checking account, waiting to hear if the mass they'd found was going to kill her. When the receptionist called her name, Sophie rose on unsteady legs. She never expected the doctor who would determine her fate would be him, Dr. Ethan Cole, the millionaire medical prodigy whose face graced the building's lobby. The man whose eyes would soon see her at her most vulnerable. The nurse led Sophie down a hallway lined with framed accolades that made her stomach tighten. Photographs of Dr. Ethan Cole shaking hands with hospital board members, receiving awards, standing beside medical equipment worth more than she'd earn in a decade. A man born into privilege, whose biggest concern was probably which luxury car to drive today. She was shown to an examination room with a view of the Manhattan skyline. Even the hospital gown felt expensive against her skin, softer than anything she owned. Sophie perched on the edge of the table, the paper crinkling beneath her, counting the seconds until she could leave. When the door opened, the air changed. Dr. Cole wasn't what she expected, younger than his photographs, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of long hours. His white coat was impeccably pressed, but his dark hair fell slightly across his forehead, giving him a humanity the lobby portraits lacked. "Miss Bennett." His voice was low, gentle. "I'm Dr. Cole." Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice. He glanced at her chart, then back at her with eyes that saw too much. Not just her symptoms, but her worn sneakers, the calluses on her hands from waitressing, the fear she was trying desperately to hide. "Your scans show a mass on your left ovary," he said, no sugarcoating, no condescension. "Given your symptoms and blood work, I'm concerned it's malignant." The word hung between them, malignant. Cancer. A death sentence for someone like her. "What happens now?" Sophie asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "Surgery. Then chemotherapy, depending on what we find." He hesitated. "Do you have insurance?" Sophie laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "I have 3 maxed out credit cards and an eviction notice." She expected pity, maybe irritation at the inevitable administrative headache she represented. Instead, something flickered in his eyes, recognition. "We'll figure it out," he said, surprising her. "First, let's focus on the medical plan." As he examined her, his hands were clinical but careful, treating her body with a respect it rarely received. Sophie stared at the ceiling, fighting tears, wondering how many women just like her he'd seen, desperate, terrified, at the mercy of a system designed to bankrupt them as it saved them. "I can't pay for this," she finally said, after he'd explained the surgery in terms she could understand. "I'm barely making rent." Dr. Cole sat on his stool, regarding her thoughtfully. "There are programs. Waiting lists. Forms. Rejections," Sophie cut in. "I've been through it all with my mother." She hadn't meant to say that, to reveal the reason behind her fear of hospitals, of cancer. The reason she'd ignored her symptoms for so long. A long silence followed. Sophie pulled the gown tighter around herself, suddenly cold. "When did she die?" he asked quietly. 3 years ago. Breast cancer." We couldn't afford the treatments they recommended. Sophie swallowed hard. I dropped out of nursing school to care for her. Now I'm a waitress with no degree and medical debt I'll never pay off. And history's repeating itself. Dr. Cole's expression changed, a subtle shift that Sophie couldn't quite read. He stood, adjusting his white coat with a decisive movement. Not if I can help it, he said. I have an opening next Thursday for surgery. My office will call with details. As he turned to leave, Sophie found her voice again. Why would you help me? He paused at the door, looking back with eyes that suddenly seemed tired beyond their years. Because everyone deserves care, Miss Bennett. Even those who can't afford it. The door closed behind him, leaving Sophie alone with the skyline view of a city that had never shown her kindness, until today. Sophie didn't return Dr. Cole's calls. 3 days after her appointment, she tossed her cell phone into the East River, watching it sink beneath murky waters. A dramatic gesture, perhaps, but cheaper than paying the bill she couldn't afford. She took extra shifts at the diner, ignoring the pain that sometimes doubled her over in the bathroom between tables. She smiled for tips, carried plates until her arms ached, and pretended the clock wasn't ticking inside her body. You look like shit, Marco, the cook, told her bluntly one evening as she leaned against the kitchen counter, catching her breath. Thanks. You're really boosting my self-esteem here, Sophie replied, forcing a smile. I'm serious. You're pale. You've lost weight. He flipped a burger with practiced ease. You sick or something? Sophie's laugh sounded hollow even to her own ears. Or something. That night, she collapsed in her studio apartment, a converted storage space above a laundromat that vibrated with the constant hum of industrial dryers. The heat was unreliable, but the rent was cheap, the only place in the city she could afford alone after her mother died. She curled on her mattress, wrapped in the quilt her mother had made during chemo sessions, and let herself cry. Hard, racking sobs that left her gasping. She cried for her mother, for herself, for the nursing career she'd abandoned, for the future that was slipping away. On her nightstand sat the business card Dr. Cole had given her, already dog-eared from the number of times she'd picked it up only to put it down again. What was the point? Even with assistance programs, the costs would be astronomical. She'd seen this movie before, the initial optimism, the treatments that drained bank accounts before they drained life, the impossible choices between medicine and food. A week after missing her scheduled surgery, Sophie was serving breakfast when the bell above the diner door jingled. She turned with coffee pot in hand and froze. Dr. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, looking strangely out of place in his tailored overcoat. Their eyes met across the grease-scented air. Sophie nearly dropped the coffee pot. How did you find me? She demanded after he seated himself at her section. Your emergency contact. Marta Diaz? She's worried about you. Sophie cursed under her breath. Marta had been her mother's friend, the only person she'd trusted enough to list on forms. You had no right. You had an appointment, he countered, ignoring the menu she'd slapped down. A surgery date. You disappeared. I made a choice. To die. His voice was low, but the words struck with physical force. Because that's what you're choosing, Miss Bennett. Customers at nearby tables glanced over. Sophie felt her cheeks burn. I can't do this here. I'll lose my job. Then when? Dr. Cole asked, frustration finally breaking through his professional veneer. After your shift? Tomorrow. Next week, when you're too sick to stand. When will your life become the priority? Something in Sophie snapped. My life has never been the priority, she hissed, leaning across the table. Not for the city, not for the healthcare system, not for anyone. Do you know what happened after my mother died? The hospital sued me for her unpaid bills. They garnished my wages while I was trying to pay for her funeral. So forgive me if I'm not eager to start that cycle again. Dr. Cole stared at her, and for a moment, Sophie thought she'd gone too far. But instead of anger, something like recognition passed across his face. When do you finish today? He asked quietly. 4. He stood, leaving a $20 bill for the coffee he hadn't touched. I'll be back at 4. We need to talk, not as doctor and patient. Just talk. Sophie watched him leave, the 20 burning on the table like an accusation. She pocketed it with shaking hands. It would pay for her dinner for the next 3 days. At 4:05, Sophie stepped outside the diner, her threadbare coat pulled tight against the November chill. She half expected Dr. Cole to have forgotten his promise, to have returned to his world of marble floors and million-dollar equipment. Instead, he stood beside a black sedan, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. I didn't think you'd come back, Sophie admitted. I said I would. Simple words, spoken like someone unaccustomed to breaking promises. He opened the passenger door. Sophie hesitated. Where are we going? Somewhere we can talk. He must have seen her wariness. A public place. A cafe near here. The cafe turned out to be a small, steamy establishment with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs, not at all where she imagined someone like him would voluntarily spend time. They sat by a window streaked with condensation, 2 cups of tea between them. Why are you doing this? Sophie finally asked, cradling her mug for warmth. Chasing down a non-compliant patient can't be in your job description. Dr. Cole, Ethan, as he'd asked her to call him outside the hospital, studied her with those 2 perceptive eyes. Do you know why I became an oncologist? Sophie shrugged. Good money? Prestige? A smile flickered across his face, there and gone. My father died of pancreatic cancer when I was 14. Stage 4 by the time they found it. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. The revelation hung between them. Sophie looked at him differently now, seeing past the expensive watch and perfect haircut. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. We had good insurance. The best care available. Ethan rotated his mug slowly. And it still wasn't enough. That's the thing about cancer, it doesn't care about your bank account. But having money helps, Sophie countered. Having options helps. Yes. No platitudes, no denial of her reality. It does. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's ambient noise washing over them. I have a proposal, Ethan finally said. The Westbrook Foundation funds care for underinsured patients. It's competitive, but as a board member, I have some influence. Sophie's defenses rose immediately. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's what the foundation exists to do. And what would I owe you? Nothing in life was free, Sophie had learned that lesson repeatedly. Ethan looked genuinely startled. Nothing. This isn't a transaction, Sophie. The use of her first name, gentle, familiar, caught her off guard. In the hospital, she'd been Miss Bennett, a case file. Now she was Sophie, a person. Then why me? She pressed. Why track me down, bring me here? You must see dozens of patients in my situation every week. Ethan's gaze dropped to his hands, then back to her face. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Your intake form. You wrote that you were in nursing school before your mother got sick. Sophie tensed. What about it? You wanted to help people. To heal them. And the system you wanted to be part of failed you, twice. He leaned forward slightly. I can't fix the system. But maybe I can keep it from failing you a third time. The simplicity of it, the lack of pity or condescension in his voice, made Sophie's throat tight. She looked away, watching pedestrians hurry past the fogged window. I still can't afford to stop working, she said finally. Even with the Foundation's help. We can schedule treatments around your shifts. We can make this work, Sophie. There was an intensity in his voice that had nothing to do with professional obligation. Sophie studied him, this man from another world who somehow saw her. Not as a charity case, not as a hopeless situation, but as someone worth fighting for. It had been so long since anyone had fought for her. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try. Relief transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. Good. That's good. He reached into his coat and produced a business card, not the standard hospital one, but his personal card with a cell phone number handwritten on the back. Call me. Anytime. Day or night. Sophie took the card, their fingers brushing. A connection, small but electric, a reminder that beneath their differences, they were just two people sitting in a cafe, trying to fight back the darkness together. Sophie's surgery revealed what they'd feared, stage 2 ovarian cancer. She woke in the recovery room to find Ethan checking her vitals himself, though she wasn't technically his patient anymore. You should be at home, she mumbled through the anesthesia fog. It's Christmas Eve. His smile was tired but genuine. I'm Jewish. And on call. Sophie learned many things about Ethan Cole in the weeks that followed. That he worked holidays so colleagues with children could be home. That he ate standing up, accustomed to rushing between patients. That beneath his composed exterior lived a man of startling intensity, particularly when it came to her care. January brought Sophie's first chemotherapy session. She'd insisted on scheduling it during her day off, determined to work through treatment. Ethan found her in the infusion center, a knit cap covering her already thinning hair. You don't have to check on me, she said when he appeared beside her chair. I'm sure you have actual emergencies to handle. I was passing by. They both knew it was a lie, the oncology floor was nowhere near his usual rounds. He pulled up a chair, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances from nurses who rarely saw the renowned Dr. Cole sitting with patients during chemo. How's the diner? He asked. Greasy. Busy. Sophie shrugged. Marco keeps making me protein shakes I didn't ask for. Says I'm too skinny. Smart man, this Marco. Don't you start. But she was smiling, the foredrip momentarily forgotten. They fell into a pattern. Ethan would happen by during her treatments. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes longer. They talked about books, about the patients he could discuss without violating privacy, about her former nursing studies. Never about her prognosis, never about the gulf between their worlds. February brought brutal cold and Sophie's inevitable job loss. She'd tried to hide her symptoms, but when she vomited in the restaurant bathroom one too many times, her manager had regretfully let her go. "It's temporary," he'd promised. "Come back when you're better." If she got better. The unspoken qualifier hung in the air. Ethan found her sitting on a bench outside the hospital after learning her blood work wasn't improving as hoped. Without asking, he sat beside her, their breath clouding in the frigid air. "I can't pay my rent," Sophie said, staring straight ahead. "I can't work. I can't." Her voice broke. "I'm becoming my mother. Everything I swore I wouldn't let happen." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I have a guest apartment. Above my garage. It's sitting empty." Sophie turned to him sharply. "No. It's not charity," he said quickly. "It's practical. You'd be closer to the hospital. No commute for treatments. It's inappropriate." But even as she said it, Sophie knew she was running out of options. "What's inappropriate is you missing treatments because you can't afford the subway fare." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Sophie, please. Let me help." She studied him, this man who had crashed into her life like a meteor, disrupting everything. He'd maintained professional boundaries, never pushing beyond friendship. But the offer of housing crossed a line they'd been carefully avoiding. "People will talk," she said finally. "They'll assume. Let them." Ethan's gaze was steady. "We know the truth." But what was the truth? That he was her doctor? No, he'd referred her to a colleague for treatment. That he was her benefactor? In some ways. That she was starting to look for his face in every hospital corridor, that her heart lifted when he appeared. That was a truth Sophie wasn't ready to examine. "1 month, she conceded. "Until I figure something out." The guest apartment turned out to be larger than Sophie's studio, with windows that caught the morning sun and a small kitchenette. Ethan gave her a key, showed her how the heating worked, and then left her alone, no hovering, no expectations. That night, lying in a bed more comfortable than any she'd slept in for years, Sophie stared at the ceiling and wondered how her life had brought her here, dependent on the kindness of a man she'd once resented for his privilege. A text message illuminated her new phone, another gift from Ethan she'd initially refused. "Did you eat dinner?" Something warm unfurled in Sophie's chest. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine concern. She texted back a single word. "Yes." His reply came seconds later, "Good. Rest well, Sophie." Simple words. But in them, she found something she'd been missing since her mother died, the sense that someone in the world cared whether she lived or died. Not because of what she could give them, but simply because she existed. By April, Sophie's blood work was showing improvement. Her hair was growing back in soft wisps, and some days, she almost felt like herself again. The 1 month in Ethan's guest apartment had stretched to 3. She'd insisted on helping around his property, tending the small garden, organizing bookshelves, anything to feel less like a charity case. Ethan never mentioned rent, and Sophie couldn't bring herself to leave. They'd fallen into an easy routine. Morning coffee on his porch when their schedules aligned. Occasional dinners where they discuss everything except cancer. Movie nights when Sophie's energy permitted, sitting at opposite ends of his couch, the distance between them both necessary and increasingly difficult to maintain. Because somewhere between diagnosis and recovery, Sophie had done the unthinkable, she'd fallen in love with Ethan Cole. It was impossible, of course. He was her former doctor, her benefactor, a man whose world operated on a different axis than hers. Their friendship existed in a bubble outside reality, a temporary arrangement until she was well enough to return to real life. The reminder came brutally one evening when Sophie answered Ethan's door, thinking it was the delivery food they'd ordered. Instead, she found a woman in a designer dress, her surprise quickly morphing into understanding. "Oh," the woman said, perfectly manicured hands still raised to knock again. "You must be the patient Ethan mentioned. The one staying in his guest house." Sophie's chest tightened. "I'm Sophie. Vivian Westbrook." The name hit like a physical blow, Westbrook, as in Westbrook Oncology. As in the hospital's primary benefactor. "Is Ethan home? We have the foundation gala tonight." Before Sophie could answer, Ethan appeared behind her in a tuxedo that probably cost more than 6 months of Sophie's former rent. He faltered momentarily, seeing them together. "Vivian. You're early." "Clearly." Her smile was polite but assessing as she looked between them. Sophie stepped back, suddenly acutely aware of her faded jeans and second-hand sweater. "Your food should be here soon," she said to Ethan, retreating. "I'll just..." Ethan began, but she was already moving toward the guest apartment, her cheeks burning. She spent the evening by the window, watching Ethan and Vivian leave in his car, both beautiful, both belonging to a world Sophie had only glimpsed from its edges. They made sense together, hospital royalty, probably childhood friends, their families connected by wealth and influence. What had she been thinking? That a man like Ethan Cole would want more than friendship with a waitress turned patient? That the concern in his eyes meant something beyond professional care? By morning, Sophie had made her decision. She waited until Ethan left for work, then packed her few belongings. She left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for everything. It's time I stood on my own again. Please don't worry, I'll continue treatments. Sophie." She'd found a room to rent with her diner's former cook, Marco. It was small, with a shared bathroom, but the rent was manageable with the part-time receptionist job she'd secured at a community clinic. Ethan called immediately after finding her note. Then texted. Then called again. Sophie answered on the third day, sitting on Marco's fire escape, watching the sunset paint Brooklyn's skyline. "You left," Ethan said without preamble, his voice tight. "It was time." "Without saying goodbye? Without talking to me?" Sophie closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "I saw you. With Vivian Westbrook. You looked right together." A pause. "Vivian and I serve on the hospital board together." "There's nothing." "It doesn't matter," Sophie interrupted. "Don't you see? Whether it's Vivian or someone else, you belong in that world. I don't. That's not fair. To either of us." "Fair?" Sophie laughed, the sound brittle. "None of this has been fair, Ethan. I got cancer at 26. I lost my mother, my career, almost my life. And then I met you, and for a while, I forgot that we're from different planets. Sophie. I'm grateful. I'll always be grateful." Her voice softened. "But I need to rebuild my life on my own terms. Not as your project or your house guest or your, whatever this was becoming." The silence stretched between them, heavy with words unsaid. "I never saw you as a project," Ethan finally said, his voice low. "Never. Maybe not intentionally." Sophie watched a pigeon land on the railing beside her. But that's how everyone else sees it. The great Dr. Cole and his charity case. Since when do you care what everyone else thinks? The question struck home. Sophie had spent her life defying expectations, fighting against the limitations of her circumstances. When had she started using other people's perceptions as a shield against her own feelings? "My last chemotherapy session is next week," she said instead of answering. "After that, I'll have follow-up appointments, but it's time to move forward." Ethan was quiet for so long Sophie thought he might have hung up. Then, "Are you happy, Sophie? In this new place? With this new job?" The question was so unexpected, so free of judgment, that Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm getting there. Then I'm glad for you." His voice wavered slightly. "But Sophie, if you ever need anything, anything at all, I'm still here. That doesn't change." After they hung up, Sophie sat on the fire escape until darkness fell completely, wondering why doing the right thing felt so much like making the biggest mistake of her life. Summer scorched the city with relentless heat. Sophie's hair had grown back in loose curls, different from the straight strands she'd had before. A physical reminder that cancer changed everything, some things visibly, others in ways only she could feel. Her job at the community clinic was rewarding but exhausting. Every day she saw people like her former self, uninsured, desperate, falling through the cracks of a broken system. She helped where she could, guiding them to resources, advocating with insurance companies, sometimes just listening. She hadn't seen Ethan since leaving his guest house 3 months earlier. He'd respected her boundaries, sending only occasional texts to check on her health. She'd responded politely but briefly, maintaining the distance she'd created. Until the day Marta Diaz, her mother's friend and her emergency contact, appeared at the clinic, clutching a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" Marta demanded, slapping the paper onto Sophie's reception desk. The headline jumped out immediately: "Westbrook Air launches controversial free cancer clinic in underserved neighborhood." Beneath it was a photo of Ethan cutting a ribbon outside a modest building in Sophie's old neighborhood. The article detailed how Dr. Ethan Cole had used his personal fortune and connections to establish a clinic providing free cancer screenings and treatment coordination for uninsured patients. The Cole-Bennett initiative aims to bridge the gap between diagnosis and treatment for vulnerable populations, the article quoted him saying. Cole-Bennett. Sophie's hands trembled as she read further. "Named for my father, Richard Cole, and Carmen Bennett, a woman who died because our system failed her," Dr. Cole explained when asked about the name. "Her daughter showed me that medicine isn't just about treating disease, it's about treating people, with all the complex realities they bring to the examination room." Sophie couldn't breathe. He had named a clinic after her mother. Had used his influence and wealth to build something that might have saved Carmen Bennett's life if it had existed 3 years earlier. "He's been trying to reach you," Marta said more gently. "He called me last week, asking if you'd changed your number." "I've been busy," Sophie managed, still staring at the newspaper. Marta made a disapproving sound. "That man moved heaven and earth for you, Nina. And not just you. Look what he's building because of you. I never asked him to." "Of course not. That's not how love works." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Not charity, not obligation, not professional concern. Marta saw what Sophie had been too afraid to acknowledge. "He deserves better," Sophie whispered. "Someone from his world." Marta took Sophie's face between her weathered hands. Listen to me. That man was in his world for years before he met you. Living in his fancy house, working in his fancy hospital. And you know what I see in his eyes now? Life. Purpose. The same thing I see in yours when you're not being stubborn. That evening, Sophie found herself standing outside the new clinic. It was closed, but lights still burned in a back office. Through the window, she could see Ethan at a desk, tie loosened, hair rumpled as he pored over papers. She knocked on the glass door. He looked up, their eyes meeting through the pane. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan was on his feet, crossing to the door, unlocking it. Sophie. Just her name, but it contained volumes. You named a clinic after my mother. Her voice caught. Why? Ethan's expression softened. Because she matters. Because what happened to her shouldn't happen to anyone. Because her daughter changed how I practice medicine. I don't understand. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophie had come to recognize as frustration. Before I met you, I treated cancer. After meeting you, I started treating people who have cancer. People with jobs they can't afford to lose, with financial struggles that impact their care, with fears that go beyond mortality. Sophie stepped into the clinic, looking around at the simple but dignified space. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers like Westbrook Oncology. Just clean, welcoming spaces designed for people who rarely felt welcomed in medical settings. My mother would have loved this, she admitted. She always said if she got better, she wanted to help others going through it. Tell me about her, Ethan said softly. I know how she died. I'd like to know how she lived. So Sophie did, standing in the clinic bearing her mother's name. She told Ethan stories she'd kept locked away. How Carmen Bennett had raised her alone after Sophie's father left, working 2 jobs but never missing a school event. How she'd insisted Sophie apply to nursing school despite the cost, believing education was the one thing no one could take away. How she'd faced her diagnosis with a courage Sophie still strived to emulate. As she spoke, something shifted between them, the last barriers falling away. Not doctor and patient. Not benefactor and recipient. Just 2 people shaped by loss, standing in a place built to prevent others from experiencing the same. I missed you, Ethan said when she finally fell silent. The simple honesty of it took Sophie's breath away. I missed you too. An equally simple truth, finally acknowledged. He reached for her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers interlaced, a bridge between worlds that perhaps weren't as separate as Sophie had believed. The clinic's just the beginning, Ethan said. There's so much more to do. So many changes needed. He hesitated. I could use your perspective. Your experience. Your passion. Are you offering me a job, Dr. Cole? Sophie asked, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I'm offering you a partnership. The word carried weight beyond professional collaboration. In whatever capacity you're comfortable with. Sophie looked at their joined hands, then back at his face, open, vulnerable, hopeful. She thought of all the reasons she'd run away. Her pride. Her fear. Her certainty that their worlds couldn't coexist. But standing in this place, a physical manifestation of what they could build together, those reasons seemed smaller, less insurmountable. I'd like that, she said softly. A partnership. The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise after the longest night, gradual, then brilliant, illuminating everything. They rebuilt their connection carefully, like setting a broken bone. Professional collaboration came first, Sophie bringing her patient perspective to the clinic's operations, Ethan providing the medical expertise and connections that made their work possible. They established boundaries. Sophie insisted on drawing a salary commensurate with her responsibilities, refusing special treatment. Ethan respected her independence, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Summer turned to fall. Sophie's 6-month scans came back clear, no evidence of disease. She celebrated by enrolling in night classes to complete her nursing degree, determined to finish what cancer had interrupted. The clinic flourished. Patients came first as a trickle, then a steady stream, people who would have otherwise delayed care until it was too late. Each success story felt like redemption, each patient navigated successfully through the system, a quiet victory. One rainy October evening, they worked late, finalizing a grant proposal for expanded services. Takeout containers littered Ethan's desk. Sophie's textbooks were stacked beside patient files. "We should include a transportation stipend," Sophie said, highlighting a section of the budget. "Many patients miss appointments because they can't afford the subway." Ethan nodded, making the adjustment. Sophie watched his hands, surgeon's hands, precise and confident, and felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Why did you become a doctor?" she asked suddenly. "You said your father died of cancer, but was that the only reason?" Ethan set down his pen, considering. "Partly. But also because medicine seemed like the ultimate equalizer. Disease doesn't care about wealth or status. For all my family's money, we couldn't buy my father more time." He smiled ruefully. "Of course, then I entered the system and realized how naive that view was. Access to care is anything but equal. Which is why we're doing this," Sophie said, gesturing to the proposal. "Which is why we're doing this," he agreed. Their eyes met across the desk, held. "Ethan," Sophie began, then hesitated. "Yes. When you look at me, what do you see?" The question had been building inside her for months. Not just professionally, but personally. The distance between them had narrowed day by day, yet something still held her back, the fear that he saw her differently than she saw herself. Ethan studied her face, taking his time before answering. "I see the woman who called me out for parking in a loading zone on her second day working here." Sophie laughed, remembering her mortification when she realized she'd scolded the clinic's founder. "I see the former patient who now helps others navigate a system that nearly broke her. I see someone who lost everything and rebuilt from scratch." His voice softened. "I see the person who taught me that the medical chart is never the whole story." She swallowed hard. "Not a charity case. Never that." He reached across the desk, his hand stopping just short of hers. "Is that what you've been afraid of all this time? That I see you as a project?" Sophie looked down at the small space between their hands. "When you grow up poor, you learn that people with money usually want something in return for their help. Or they want to feel good about themselves by helping the less fortunate. And what do you think I want?" She met his gaze. "That's what I can't figure out. You have everything, money, reputation, a successful career. The clinic is thriving. Your obligation to me as a patient was fulfilled months ago. Have you considered," Ethan said quietly, "that I simply want you?" The words hung between them, honest and terrifying. "I want your perspective in this clinic. I want your voice in meetings where decisions are made. I want your laugh when I say something unintentionally ridiculous. His fingers moved the final inch, covering hers. I want your company on evenings like this, working towards something meaningful together. Sophie's heart hammered in her chest. People will talk. They'll say I'm with you for your money, or that you're with me because I was your patient. Let them. Ethan's voice was firm. We know the truth. Which is that two people from different worlds found each other in the most unlikely place. That cancer destroyed some things but created space for others. That maybe, just maybe, those different worlds weren't meant to stay separate. Sophie turned her hand beneath his, their palms meeting, fingers intertwining. A simple gesture that felt monumental, the conscious choice to bridge the gap between them. I'm still going to argue with you about the clinic budget, she warned, her voice unsteady. Ethan smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. I would expect nothing less. And I'm keeping my apartment. Of course. And I might never be comfortable at those hospital fundraisers with people who spend more on wine than my monthly rent. We'll figure it out. His thumb traced circles on her skin. Together. The rain drummed against the windows, cocooning them in this moment of transition, from colleagues to something more. No patients to interrupt, no emergency pages, just the quiet acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since Sophie first walked into his examination room, terrified and defiant. Together, she repeated, the word both a promise and a beginning. 1 year to the day after Sophie's diagnosis, they stood together on the clinic's roof, watching fireworks burst over the city skyline. The air held the first crisp hints of autumn, and Sophie pulled her cardigan closer, leaning slightly against Ethan's side. Happy Cancerversary, he said softly, his arm slipping around her waist. Sophie smiled at the term, part of the unofficial vocabulary cancer patients developed among themselves. Strange thing to celebrate. Not celebrating the cancer. Celebrating that you're here. That we're here. Below them, the clinic that bore her mother's name had just completed its first successful year. Over 2,000 patients screened, hundreds navigated through treatment, dozens of lives potentially saved through early detection. Sophie thought of how differently this day could have ended, if she'd continued ignoring her symptoms, if she'd never met Ethan, if she'd allowed pride to keep her from accepting help. Sometimes I think about parallel universes, she mused, watching a burst of gold sparks fade into the night sky. In how many of them did I walk out of your office and never return? In how many did I die like my mother, because I was too proud or too scared to accept help? Ethan's arm tightened around her. Don't. It's not morbid, she assured him. It makes me grateful. For this version of events, where the worst thing that ever happened to me somehow led to the best things. And there had been many best things. Her health restored. Her nursing studies resumed, with graduation approaching in the spring. The clinic's success. And Ethan, not just as her romantic partner but as her collaborator, challenging her, supporting her, treating her as an equal despite the disparities in their backgrounds. The clinic's getting national attention, Ethan said. That call earlier? The governor's office. They want to use our model for a statewide initiative. Sophie turned to him, eyes wide. Are you serious? He nodded, a smile breaking across his face. Your transportation stipend idea especially. They want to implement it across all state-funded cancer centers. She pressed her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed. One small idea, born from her own experience struggling to afford subway fare to appointments, now potentially helping thousands. "We did that," she whispered. "You did that?" "We did that," Ethan corrected gently. "Your experience, my resources. That's always been our strength." A year ago, those words would have made Sophie bristle, the implication that she brought problems while he brought solutions. Now she understood the truth was more nuanced. Her experiences had value precisely because they were different from his. Their perspectives, combined, created something neither could have built alone. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. "A cancerversary gift, of sorts." He handed her a small velvet box. Sophie's heart jumped, but when she opened it, she found not a ring but a key. "What's this?" "The apartment next to yours became available. I bought it." At her startled look, he continued quickly. "Not to pressure you. Not to change anything about your independence. But to give us options." Sophie fingered the key, understanding blooming. "You'd live in my neighborhood? In a walk-up with unreliable heating and neighbors who play salsa music until 2 a.m. Ethan laughed. "I spend most nights there anyway. Might as well have my own toothbrush." It was true. Despite maintaining separate residences, her modest apartment, his brownstone in a wealthier district, they spent more nights together than apart. Usually at her place, which would have surprised anyone who saw the stark differences in their living situations. "What about your house?" she asked. "I'll keep it for now. Maybe someday we'll want more space." He hesitated. "Maybe someday we'll want room for a family. But that's a conversation for another day." Family. The word caught in Sophie's chest. After cancer, she hadn't been sure if children would be possible. Her oncologist had discussed fertility preservation, but treatments had begun too quickly for many options. "The point is," Ethan continued, "I don't need marble countertops or a 3-car garage. I need you. In whatever way makes you comfortable." Sophie closed her fingers around the key, its edges pressing into her palm. A tangible symbol of what they'd been building, a life that accommodated both their worlds, that respected her need for independence while acknowledging their deepening connection. "You know what today really marks?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "1 year since I walked into an examination room convinced I was going to die, and instead found a reason to live more fully than I ever had before." Ethan's eyes softened. He cupped her face with gentle hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "I love you, Sophie Bennett. Not despite where you come from or what you've been through, but because of it. Because you transformed your pain into purpose. Because you never let me get away with easy answers." "I love you too," she whispered. "Even though you never remember to separate the recycling properly." He laughed, the sound merging with another firework burst overhead. Then he kissed her, there on the rooftop with the city spread before them, the wealthy districts where he'd grown up, the struggling neighborhoods where she'd fought to survive, and everything in between. One city, containing multitudes like them. The key pressed between their clasped hands, opening doors neither had imagined possible a year before. Cancer had nearly taken Sophie's life, but in its aftermath, something beautiful had grown, not just between them, but within the walls of the clinic below, where others like her would find not just medical care but dignity, respect, and the chance to rewrite their stories. Sometimes life's darkest moments carry hidden gifts. Sophie's cancer diagnosis seemed like the end of her story, another tragedy in a life marked by struggle and loss. Instead, it became the catalyst for her greatest transformation. Through Sophie and Ethan's journey, we're reminded that healing happens on multiple levels. Physical recovery is just the beginning. True healing comes when we use our deepest wounds to recognize and mend the same hurt in others. Their unlikely connection teaches us that authentic relationships transcend superficial differences. What matters isn't where we come from, but where we're willing to go together. The walls we build between worlds, rich and poor, doctor and patient, helper and helped, often crumble when we allow ourselves to see the humanity on both sides. Perhaps most importantly, their story shows us that gratitude and purpose can emerge from our greatest challenges. Sophie's cancer led her back to her original calling in healthcare, but with a deeper understanding that makes her more effective than she might otherwise have been. Ethan's privilege found meaning through Sophie's perspective, channeling resources where they could create lasting change. In life's most broken places, new growth is possible. Not despite our wounds, but because of them, if we're brave enough to let them change us, and wise enough to use them to change the world. If Sophie and Ethan's story touched something in you today, don't let this moment pass without action. Their journey reminds us that transformation often begins in our darkest hours, but only if we're willing to take the first step. Is there someone in your life bridging worlds the way Sophie and Ethan did? Someone using their pain as purpose, their challenges as fuel for change? Tag them in the comments below and let them know their work matters. Better yet, become that person. What hardship have you experienced that gives you unique insight? What resources or privileges do you possess that could help others facing similar struggles? The intersection of your pain and your power is where your greatest contribution lies. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more narratives that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an opportunity to see yourself, or someone else, in a new light. Remember, every breakthrough begins with a breakdown. Every healing journey starts with acknowledgement of wounds. And every revolution, whether personal or societal, begins with one person refusing to accept that things must remain as they've always been. Until next time, keep your hearts open to unexpected connections. They just might save you.